душе моя Господа, благословен еси, Господи. Благослови, душе моя Господа, и вся внутренняя моя, имя святое Его.
Thank you, Will, and congratulations for your French. First of all, I would like to convey the greetings and blessing of His Eminence Cardinal Koch. He is very pleased that this conference take place and on this such interesting topic, and he is looking forward to seeing your pilgrimage in 1 month in Rome. I don't have any PowerPoint or slides, but I will try to speak clearly with my poor English. My topic is the Territory, an Ecumenical Challenge. The notion of territory has become an important issue in the relations between Catholics and Orthodox in recent years. Raised by several Orthodox churches, the question of territoriality has not always been well understood in the West. Of course, all ecclesiology, Catholic as well as Orthodox, is based on a local principle. Since Christian antiquity, the Church considers itself above all as the gathering of a community in a place to celebrate the Eucharist around the bishop. When St. Paul or St. Ignatius of Antioch addressed Christians, they always addressed the church gathered in a city. The church in Corinth, the church in Rome, the church in Thessalonica, etc. For a very long time, Christians have understood that the church is realized in one place. Dioceses, parishes were conceived on a territorial principle. Canon law has validated this reality by making the territorial criterion almost always prevail over the personal principle. Moreover, in many ways, it can be said that the Church has contributed to the development of territories and to a particular understanding of space. But in the 20th century, what is the actual relevance of the territorial principle? Westerners, even when they are not Catholic, are accustomed to the coexistence of different confessions on the same territory. The underlying rationale is that of religious freedom, and one wonders if recourse to the territorial principle could not be a disguised way of making any given territory the preserve of one church. These are some of the opinions that have emerged in the debate on canonical territory. It may be useful firstly to recall the terms of this debate before reflecting on the place of the territorial criterion in current Catholic ecclesiology and canon law, and to reflect on how this criterion could be updated. The notion of canonical territory has been put forward in recent years by several Orthodox churches. The Moscow Patriarchate has been the most energetic defender of an ecclesiology based on a territorial criterion. Among other examples of its view is the memorandum of the Department of External Church Relations issued on 25 June 2002 after the erection of the 4 Catholic dioceses in Russia, entitled Catholic Proselytism Among the Orthodox Population in Russia, which summarizes well the arguments of the Russian Orthodox Church. The memorandum is based on the 8th Canon of Nicaea. I quote, "The concept of canonical territory is not an invention of the Russian Church, which would have appeared for some ideological reason. It derives from the canonical tradition of the ancient undivided Church. There is a very old canon common to the Eastern Church and the Western Church, one bishop per city. This means that in the territory taken over by a bishop, the authority of another legitimate bishop cannot be extended. This principle is respected until today both in the Orthodox Church and in the Catholic Church. End of quote. Admittedly, this principle is now experiencing exceptions. The document evokes the case of the diaspora. That is to say, I quote, Orthodox living in the territories under the jurisdiction of Catholic bishops. End of quote. This principle has also been violated. The document quotes, at the time of the Crusades, the erection of parallel Catholic hierarchy. However, continues the memorandum, the Second Vatican Council, quote, by calling the Orthodox Church sister churches, admitted the fact that the Orthodox churches have their territory on which they provide their salvific ministry. That is to say, they have what we call today a canonical territory, end of quote. 5 years later, at a symposium in Moscow on the notion of canonical territory, I was one of the participants of this symposium, the 10 Metropolitan Kirill recalled that, I quote, the link between the local church, the apostolic church that is realized in a concrete place, with its well-defined territory is fundamental in Christian ecclesiology. The latter being based on a territorial principle and not an ethnic one, universal orthodoxy is composed not of national churches but of local churches which exercise their ministry in a concrete canonical territory. End of quote. The Moscow Patriarchate was not the only Orthodox church to invoke the notion of canonical territory. During his visit to Rome in 2002, Patriarch Theoctist of Romania gave a speech resuming part of the same argument. I quote, the principle of canonical territory, which does not derive from a purely legalistic will to solve a temporary historical problem, but from a deep ecclesiological foundation, retains its own value and importance for even today. End of quote. 4 years later, in 2006, the Ecumenical Patriarchate also spoke of the geographical principle in ecclesiology. The context was different. The Holy Synod of the Ecumenical Patriarchate responded to the Pope Benedict XVI's abandonment of the title Patriarch of the West. The note of the Holy Synod of the Patriarchate recalls that, I quote, the awareness of the geographical limits of each ecclesiastical jurisdiction has never ceased to be a fundamental element of Orthodox ecclesiology. End of quote. The prominence of the concept of canonical territory by the Orthodox Church generated a debate with Cardinal Walter Kasper. In March 2002, a few weeks after the announcement of the establishment of the ecclesiastical province in Russia, Cardinal Kasper analyzed the issue in an article entitled The Theological Roots of the Conflict Between Moscow and Rome. The first question, to which the beginning of the article is devoted, is that of canonical territory. For Cardinal Kasper, I quote, this concept already clearly shows a fundamental difference. Indeed, he says, the Catholic Church does not know the notion of canonical territory. Certainly, he says, I quote, it too, the Catholic Church, is organized on a territorial basis, and within it is worse the rule already in force in the Holy Church that the bishop must not interfere in affairs external to his diocese. However, the Catholic Church is a universal church entrusted with a universal task on the foundation of the words of the risen Lord, go and make disciples of all nations. But that has nothing to do with the division of the world into canonical territories. End of quote. Parallel structures, and this is an important moment in the argument developed by Cardinal Kasper, would therefore be inevitable in a context of division. I quote, the existence, unfortunately necessary, of parallel canonical structures within the Orthodox world, and therefore of the Russian Orthodox Church, is by no means new and unknown, but reflects a practice followed by all the churches for many centuries. A solution to this problem will only be possible ecumenically, that is, when we can achieve full communion among the churches. End of quote. In 2003, Cardinal Kasper reflected further on this issue in an article entitled Il Territorio Canonical. In this text, he develops more fully his point of view and nuances it compared to the opinion he had expressed in 2002. Certainly, he said, unlike the Eastern churches, the term canonical territory is not usual in Western ecclesiology and the canon law of the Latin Church. However, he said, this notion is not unknown to the Latin tradition because the Catholic Church is composed territorially exactly like the Orthodox Church. Indeed, I quote, territorial composition refers to the oldest tradition. It is rooted in biblical and patristic faith that the one Church of Jesus Christ is present in every local church. Already the First Ecumenical Council of Nicaea of 325, resuming an ancient tradition, provides in its 6 canons that the Bishop of Alexandria, Antioch, and Rome have respectively a predominant role in a wider territory. The following Council of Constantinople extended to its disposition to the See of Constantinople and decreed that a bishop could not interfere in any other episcopal territory. Therefore, the prevailing principle was that in a given place, only one bishop can sit. End of quote. Finally, in 2006, Cardinal Kasper once again approached the question of territory in his communique concerning the abolition of the title Patriarch of the West in the Annuario Pontificio 2006. The territory of the See of the Bishop of Rome, according to Cardinal Kasper, has never been well defined. Unlike the ancient patriarchates of the East, today, he continued, the notion of the West has nothing to do with the territory and cannot be used as defining a patriarchal territory. End of quote. This recent debate between some Catholics and Orthodox on the notion of canonical territory is undoubtedly for the Catholic Church an opportunity to revisit the foundations of its own ecclesiology. What is then, in contemporary Catholic canon law and ecclesiology, the validity of the territorial principle? Admittedly, the territorial criterion has long been weakened by the phenomenon of the union to Rome of fragments of Eastern Orthodox or Oriental Orthodox churches with ritual or canonical particularities. Moreover, the large number of auxiliary bishops in some Catholic dioceses also contradicts the letter of the principle of episcopal uniqueness. However, this embrittlement of the territorial criterion does not call into question the principle. Territoriality remains clearly the canonical foundation for the organization of the Catholic Church. Latin canon law, as far as the organization of the Church is concerned, applies 2 principles: the principle of territoriality on the one hand, and on the other hand, that of personality, which takes into account elements such as right, language, and nationality. Now, very clearly, the territorial principle, which derives from that of the uniqueness of jurisdiction within the same territory, prevails as a general rule over that of the personality. The criterion of territoriality applies above all in the definition of the diocese. Canon 372 of the Code of 1983 based very clearly the diocese on the territorial criterion. I quote this canon. In principle, the portion of the people of God that constitute a diocese or other particular church will be circumscribed in a specific territory so that it includes all the faithful who inhabit this territory. End of quote. The Code of Canons of the Eastern Churches also preserves the principle of the territory, and this at the level not only of the eparchy, which goes without saying, but also at the patriarchal level. The reminder of the territorial limits of Catholic patriarchies, and therefore of the jurisdiction of the patriarchs, is a crucial point for these churches. Many of those faithful are in the diaspora. The Code of Canons of the Eastern Churches even includes a chapter entitled, I quote, "The Territory of the Patriarchal Church and the Power of the Patriarch and Synods outside this territory." End of quote. While normative within the Catholic Church, can the territorial criterion be applied in the relations between separate churches, albeit recognizing themselves as sisters in the apostolic succession? This is an ecumenical question which I would like to raise now. In reality, the understanding of the territory cannot be limited to a canonical approach. Many recent works in sociology and political science have attempted to understand contemporary developments of the territory. Many political scientists thus theorize the end of territory. To quote some French authors in this field, I would like to mention especially Olivier Roy, predicting the decline of religions associated with the territory. Another author, Bertrand Bady, in his essay entitled The End of the Territories, reflects, meanwhile, on a post-territorial world order. Bertrand Bady argues that, I quote, "The link between jurisdiction and territory is neither necessary nor eternal, and that many other forms of implementation of authority have been contemplated in history and will be." Thus, the merchant model of the city, or the imperial model based on a multinational cultural identity with shifting borders, or the feudal model based on allegiances between people dissociated from the principle of territoriality. According to Bertrand Bady, the principle of territoriality was affirmed on the rubble of the feudal order, mainly through the ecclesial organization. Indeed, the culture of space is peculiar to Christianity in its different traditions and distinguishes it from most other religions. Since the end of the Second World War, there has been, according to him, a decomposition of territories. Territories, once the source of rights, sovereignty, and property, would be rendered archaic by the emergence of a logic of networks. Community solidarity and the rise of social networks would tend to give priority to personal links over territorial constructions. For Bady, over against a world of territories that implies closure and exclusion, there would emerge a world of networks based on openness and inclusiveness. In the Church, too, it may also have seemed possible to contemplate the so-called end of territory. Do not the faithful of large cities often attend the parish election? Do not movements have a radius of action that spontaneously transcends the borders of dioceses and national units? Does the mobility of population and the migratory movements of the world not also relativize ecclesial geography? Yet, precisely because of this growing mobility, the territorial criterion appears more than ever as a guarantee of the Catholicity of a particular church. It avoids the church's structuring principle of ethnic, social, cultural, or even spiritual affinities. Therefore, the real challenge of globalization does not consist of organizing the church on criteria that would be supposedly independent of the territory, but rather to make several cultures coexist in the same space. In other words, as Father Hervé Legrand observes, the territorial criterion has never been so relevant at a time of mobility to guarantee the Catholicity of the Church. I quote Legrand. The Catholicity of the Church is seen in a visible and tangible way when, in all places, it gathers for God a people composed of men of any tribe, language, people, and nation before the throne of the Lamb, especially in the Eucharistic assembly. The territoriality of the organization of the Church is a bulwark against the oblivion of this vocation of the Church to be Catholic in every place. Far from losing its meaning, the Catholic realization of the Church in one place gains, on the contrary, in meaning in these times when all the traditional territories become fragile and conflictual. End of quote. Let's go back to our question. Is the respect of the so-called canonical territory possible between separate churches? This is the question of the implementation of the 8th Canon of Nicaea on the uniqueness of the episcopate in a place. In fact, if we take into account the reality of our communities, it seems that the episcopal ministry cannot always be exercised by one person for pastoral reasons of historical, social, or cultural nature. The principle of Nicaea must therefore most likely need to be updated. The unity of the local church may need to be considered not so much in terms of mono-episcopacy as that of the unity of episcopate. A diversity of bishops would not contradict the principle of the 8th Canon of Nicaea if it were thought of as a single episcopate, collegially assuming pastoral vigilance under the responsibility of a titular bishop and not as a juxtaposition of parallel structures. This applies within our own churches, but also between them. Fidelity to the 8th Canon of Nicaea need not exclude a diversity of bishops and even ecclesial structures. What it excludes is that these structures be parallel and isolated from each other. Thus, for example, could we not imagine on the Happy Day when communion between Orthodox and Catholics is finally re-established, a Catholic bishop in Moscow, vicar of the Orthodox Patriarch of Moscow, and one or more Orthodox bishops in Paris, vicars of the Archbishop of Paris? Nothing would preclude the articulation of the personal principle within the territorial criterion, so that around the bishop of a territorially delimited diocese, other ministers officiate in the service of communities defined according to a personal criterion. Such perspectives, however distant they may seem to give our relations a concrete horizon that is more desirable than the confessional superimposition of parallel structures bearing the same titles, claiming the same status, operating in isolation and sometimes concurrently with each other. The coexistence of several bishops and several ecclesial structures on the same territory is often justified by the division of Christians. This juxtaposition would be a necessary evil, the separation rendering impossible the respect of the so-called canonical territories. In reality, we see that the multiplicity of bishops is not linked to the division of Christians, and that a diversity of bishops and ecclesial structures is not necessarily incompatible with the unity of Christians, provided that this diversity is not realized under the mode of the juxtaposition of bishops bearing the same titles and a superimposition of parallel structures. These perspectives could already be envisaged by expounding, to use the expression of Cardinal Casper, rules of reciprocal relations. that is, mutually accepted procedures. Such rules actually already exist in part. Thus, the Catholic Church published in 1992, within the framework of the Pontifical Commission pro-Russia, directives entitled General Principles and Practical Standards for Coordinating Evangelization and Ecumenical Engagement of the Catholic Church in Russia and other countries of the Community of Independent States. These directives, according to their authors, would be worthwhile mutatis mutandis for all countries where the Catholic and Orthodox churches live side by side. Take into account that the Orthodox Church has a special pastoral responsibility in some territories. Such rules of reciprocal relations could be clarified and expanded, perhaps firstly, and to respect the symbolic plane, ensuring that Catholic and Orthodox bishops do not carry exactly the same titles. As we know, the Catholic Church has not always respected this principle. More important are the statutes of ecclesial structures created in the traditional territories of respective churches. Could there not be a way to emphasize the care that needs to be taken not to institute double hierarchies, not to found two local churches in the same place? Catholic and Orthodox canon law probably has sufficient imagination to give to church structures established on the canonical territory of another church a status which is not necessarily that of a diocese or of full exercise. For example, in Orthodox law, exarchate status is usually used. In Catholic law, it should not be impossible to create a comparable status between the diocese and the apostolic administration. In conclusion, I would say that the revival of the churches of Central and Eastern Europe since the fall of the Berlin Wall invites the Catholic Church to draw all the practical consequences of the ecumenical principles established by the Second Vatican Council, especially those concerning sister churches. These principles entail more than ever the need to identify procedures of reciprocal relations in order to coordinate the pastoral responsibilities of our churches. These procedures should invite us to live not according to the categories of separation, but in the perspective of the return of communion, to seek not a better organization of division, but the preparation of unity. Thank you.
Благослови, душе моя Господа, и вся внутренняя моя, имя Святое